Hey everyone, and welcome to PowerPoint 9, talking about the Government, Navigation Acts, and population. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the English government and how it was established and how it actually affected the American government. So a lot of the American government that was established was based off of how English government had been established. Okay, so in 1215, the Magna Carta was created. King John signed the Magna Carta giving English people protection against unjust treatment. This made kings and queens bound by law. So before this, England kind of controlled their people based off of a tier system. If you were at the bottom, if you were the poorest of the poor, you were basically nobody, and you had no rights, no says, no say anything. Kings and nobles had all the power before this. And then, so England created a representative government. The people elected delegates to Parliament, and they served in the English government. And so basically, it's kind of like what we have today, where we elect people to represent us in government. And we have senators, we have a House of Representatives. They had delegates, what they called delegates, and they were in Parliament. And they would serve to tell the king and queen what exactly needed to happen. So they were the voice of the people, so to speak. So the king and queen promised to govern according to the laws because the legislature had more power than the ruler. So the legislature was actually Parliament. So because they had so much power, the king and queen no longer controlled as much of what happened to the people, which was kind of what America wanted. But in 1689, the English Bill of Rights was created. It said a ruler could not suspend Parliament's laws, impose taxes, or raise an army without Parliament's consent. So basically what was established in 1689 was that Parliament had control over how the people were treated. And it was no longer the king or queen's choice of how they were treated. So this was kind of new, and America had already been created. So a lot of people fled England to get rid of the king's control. But it was in 1689 that they started to realize, okay, so we're giving too much power to the king and queen. So, moving on. America, that was in 1689. So America was already starting to develop. Remember, the first successful colony was in 1610. So America had already been happening for a little while. So in America, there was 3 types of government in the colonies. So there was a charter colony, which was based on a charter, which was a grant of rights by the English monarch to a company. So that means kind of like a company ran a colony, and it was a group of people that kind of ran it. Then there was a proprietary colony where the property of an owner or a group of owners, proprietors ruled as they wished. So remember when we talked about William Penn and he created Pennsylvania, that was a proprietary colony where he controlled the land. He controlled who came to there. He controlled it however he wanted to. Those are proprietary colonies. And then there was a royal colony. We're under direct English control. That means that England controlled them, no one else controlled them, and they had complete and total control over what happened inside that colony. So Parliament appointed a governor and a council. So they would create a governor for that colony, and that governor answered to Parliament. Clear across the ocean. In England, they had to answer to them. So colonists selected an assembly, but governor followed Parliament usually. So they did have representatives, but the governor always listened to whatever that Parliament in England had to say. Okay, so those are the 3 types of government. All right, so mercantilism. So mercantilism is a theory that believes a country builds wealth and power by building its supplies of gold and silver. A country needs to export more than it imports and gain colonies. So England was using mercantilism to grow themselves. They believed that they needed more goods coming from their colonies in America than they were sending over there. And so they received raw materials from the colonies, and they forced the colonists to buy manufactured goods from England. So the colonists were forced to only interact and barter or trade or sell their goods with England, and they could only buy from England. So this guaranteed them a place to sell their raw materials, but it also forced their hand in buying only materials from England. And at first that was fine as they were developing into larger colonies. But over time, that's really not what the Americans wanted. So next we have the Navigation Acts. So as things are coming in America and out of America and to Europe and out of Europe and from Africa and to Africa, in the 1650s, the navigation laws that forced colonists to sell their raw materials to England, even if it wasn't the best price. So what I just said about they were forced to sell to England, even if a different country, let's say Italy or let's say France, they wanted the raw materials from America, they couldn't sell to them because the Navigation Acts actually said they had to sell to England. So all of the imported goods were taxed by England. So if as a colonist, if you bought something from somewhere else, you were taxed on it. Colonists were able to sell their raw materials to England. Colonists wanted to manufacture goods and sell products to anyone. So as America starts to develop and these colonies become stronger and stronger, they want the ability to sell to anyone, not just a limited England country. Okay, so that was the Navigation Act. So as you can tell, we're going to start building more and more animosity between the American colonies and England, and this will ultimately lead to the American Revolution. So, vocabulary. So we have a representative government is a system by which people elect delegates to make laws and conduct government. We've talked about this. Representative government is the type we have now. Average people like you and I, select people to represent them in government, and then that is their voice. We agree with the people we put there, and that's why we have them there. Okay, and then mercantilism, we just talked about it. It's an economic theory whose goal is building a state's wealth and power through its high exports and metals. Export, to sell to other countries. Import is to bring in from other countries. Immigration is the permanent movement of people from one country to another. Okay, so immigration is where the slaves were being brought to America. That was the immigration of there. They were being brought to America and permanently staying there. People coming from England or over from a different country and they were permanently staying in America was creating immigration. Okay, an epidemic. An epidemic is an illness that affects large numbers of people. Okay, right now we're living in an epidemic. We're living in a COVID-19 world. And so that is an epidemic. And then apprentice, a young person who learns a trade from a skilled craftsperson. So it's basically, if I had a special skill, like let's say I could weld really well, and I was the adult, and one of you were interested in learning how to weld, you would learn from me, and you would be my apprentice. I would teach you how to weld, and I would show you how to weld, and you would apprentice as a welder, is really what it's called. So it's really learning a job, okay? And then civic virtue is democratic ideas, practices, and values that are at the heart of citizenship in a free society. So it's basically what the most powerful things that you believe in, free speech, to practice your own religion, things like that are the civic virtue of what comes about in a society. Okay, so then the last thing we're going to talk about here, the last thing we're going to talk about here is the U.S. population. In 1607 through 1775, an estimated 690,000 Europeans moved to the colonies. That is a lot of people. Of course, it was 170 years, but that's a lot of people to make it to the colonies. During the same time, 278 enslaved Africans were brought to the colonies. So, I mean, almost a third of the people that were brought here were Africans, or the people that came. Epidemics killed many people. So as illnesses and diseases spread through the colonies, it killed a lot of people. Native Americans were not immune to these diseases, so a lot of them had no way to fight them off. And in 1721, 15% of Boston's population was killed by smallpox. So some of the diseases that we currently have vaccines for today, they didn't have vaccines for back then. And if an epidemic happened, it spread very quickly. And so that was one of the major things that happened in that time was the inability to stop epidemics. Not that we're stopping ours today, but that was a very big deal back then. Of course, they didn't have modern medicine either. All right, so that's pretty much it for this week. That is where we're going to leave off. We're just starting to get into some of the conflicts that are going to start arising between England and the American colonies. So as we get further into that, we'll start getting closer and closer to the American Revolution. All right, so make sure you're taking good notes and you are keeping track with those because your term test will be coming up in a few weeks and you should be prepared for that.